just heard, oh, okay, got it, that the doc has been nominated for the ACTA Best Documentary, but Tosca told me earlier that it's actually had a few more nominations as well, which is genius. But Tosca, apart from being a sort of series director and writer, she also did that writing for See What You Made Me Do. And that was quite an extraordinary piece of work, Tosca. It's so helpful in terms of generating dialogue. And it was an amazing partnership with the journalist Jess Hill, who we should also pay our respects to. It took a really forensic look at domestic abuse in Australia and is profoundly helpful in moving this issue forward. So, Tosca, you're a remarkable woman. You have had a brilliant career, but your work alone in 2021 is extraordinary. And we honour you and we thank you, Tosca. So that's our beautiful Tosca Looby. The second woman on our panel is also an extraordinary woman, Janine Hendry. Everybody knows who Janine is. We didn't a couple of years ago. It's like, who's Janine Hendry? Oh, Janine Hendry. Janine pondered on Twitter in about February this year, you know, how many extremely disgruntled women it would take to link arms around Parliament House and stand in silent protest against discrimination and alleged sexual abuse in our nation's parliament. It was just a tweet. On March the 4th, about a month later, 200 marches for justice were rallied across Australia. It brought 110,000 people together, mostly women, but lots of supporters of what we were rising for. So there was real diversity in those marches. It brought people out of their workplaces, their homes, their schools, and we protested with vigour and with real integrity and just a sense of enough is enough about gendered violence. Janine achieved this by amassing and managing a team of volunteers who pulled off this feat over a period of 12 days. It was truly amazing. I'm sure lots of you on the panel tonight were in those marches. But Janine's been an advocate for social change for 30 years, from academia to entrepreneurialism. And sadly, Janine, we acknowledge the profound personal loss of your teenage son. But through that loss, even there, Janine was able to catalyse new thinking and support for schools and the arts. She's a wonder woman, and we love you, Janine. And I'm so glad to have you both on the panel tonight. I think it's going to be a great evening. So on that note of introduction, I'm going to hand back to Sean, if I can, to just play a few snippets from Janine's documentary, Strong Female Lead, and that will start the show in terms of questions. Thanks, Sean. Not getting any sound, John?
And Julia Gillard, as to whether either of them was actually capable of doing this job.
Do you mind if I close the door? Thanks.
Tony ever did say that he would do anything to gain power. Anything.
News Limited in particular seem to be running a concerted campaign against the independents for even considering striking a formal agreement with Julia Gillard.
These three independents seriously for one moment, let alone one more week, talking about delivering Australia into the hands of this lot again.
Julia Gillard stood out. It was obvious that if anybody could pull it off, she could.
With the votes of Rob Oakeshott, Tony Windsor, as well as Andrew Wilkie and the Greens, Labor has parlayed its way into Parliament. It's a swim.
And just moving forward to the next segment.
Next on the side that said, ditch the witch. I was offended when the leader of the opposition stood next to a sign that described me as a man's bitch. I was offended by the misogyny, sexism, every day from this leader of the opposition. Every day, in every way, I will not be lectured about sexism and misogyny by this man.
It's the political blast being heard around the world. From British newspapers to feminist blogs, Julia Gillard's tirade is being watched by millions. The speech has made headlines in India, South Africa and Canada, and overnight Gillard was one of the world's top trending words on Twitter. In the US, magazine The New Yorker has titled a piece analysing the speech, What Obama Could Learn, saying the president could take debating tips from Ms Gillard.
If Hillary Clinton, for instance, gave a speech as passionately as Gillard did in that video,
ironically, they would call her shrill.
even though this is a complicated story and both sides are kind of in the wrong, because let's keep it real, like there's a dude sending out pervy text messages, she's defending that guy. But at the same time, I love her passion there because she's calling someone out for doing something that was wrong in her opinion, and that's awesome.
She checked his ass. Not now, not ever.
A primeira-ministra australiana Julia Gillard comoveu os australianos no seu discurso contra o suposto machismo.
Los sondeos le han dado la razón. La primera ministra de Australia, Julia Gillard, ha visto aumentar su popularidad después de su discurso memorable.
3 million hits on YouTube so far, but that runs at 200,000 a day. Now, Kevin Rudd's Stolen Generation speech got 200,000 hits in 4.5 years. So this speech is wildfire.
A lot of these 3 million people aren't voting in Australia. I mean, there are lots of people around the world. Julia Gillard.
I'm not talking about in terms of shifting polls. No, I'm talking about in terms of the significance of the speech and the fact that it was virtually ignored by the Canberra Press Gallery.
But there's a skateboarding dog that's had 20 million hits. I don't think he's going to get, elected Prime Minister either.
This is a speech.
It is a speech that has made news around the world. 1 million, how many hits on it?
3 million.
3 million hits on YouTube. You cannot make jokes about skateboarding dogs. This is, as long as Gillard is remembered, this speech will be remembered.
Record. So I think history will be a lot kinder to her than the current political commentators and many of her colleagues.
One sitting week of the federal parliament to go before the election. Can Julia Gillard see out the week?
Do you believe you still have the support of your caucus?
Absolutely. About being the first woman to serve in this position. There's been a lot of analysis about the so-called gender wars, me playing the so-called gender card, because heavens knows no one noticed I was a woman until I raised it. But I've been a little bit bemused by those colleagues in the newspapers who have admitted that I have suffered more pressure as a result of my gender than other Prime Ministers in the past, but then concluded that it had zero effect on my political position or the political position of the Labor Party. Jumped right in.
Since leaving politics, Julia Gillard has spent her time campaigning for education, mental health and gender equality around the world.
Why would we not want to have the best of the world's talent available to participate in building the world's future?
My sisters, my daughters, my friends, find your voice.
Critical mass of women, not just at the top level, but as ministers, as leaders of trade unions, as leaders in business, etc. I think it has to begin to make more of a difference.
Hopefully it's generally accepted, not just that women can make choices, but actually that men can too.
While I may be the first woman in this office, I will not be the last.
Does everyone feel better? Does everyone feel energized and motivated? I certainly do. Wow, that's great. Tosca, so well made. Thank you so much. Can I just ask you, despite all the horror that was going on behind the scenes and through the media for Julia Gillard through her entire prime ministership, the Gillard government got a lot of legislation through. It was a hung parliament, and there was some very important independents there in Tony Windsor and Rob Oakeshott. But do you think that having more women in independence at the table encourages better government and governance?
Yeah, look, I think that's something I didn't really understand until making this film and realising what an impact the crossbench has, not just because of the situation, obviously, in that scenario, but since then. So I'm actually in Sydney, and we've obviously got the example up here of Zali Steggall in Tony Abbott's old seat. And she has been so vocal about how she got into that position and the kind of community campaign that got her there. So, yeah, look, I think for all sorts of reasons over that span of time since the time of Tony Windsor and Rob Oakeshott and everyone, there's even more reason now for a powerful crossbench and women sitting on that crossbench. To me, it's just a no-brainer. But I actually didn't understand that until I made that film.
And do you think that that her prime ministership has made it easier for women or the next woman? Do you think that it's made a difference seeing her in that role?
I don't think that's been evidenced in the decades since she left the position. I mean, sadly, one thing that was very important to her about this film is that it does really encourage women to go into power. And, she says in the film, I want it to be easier. I know it will be easier for the next woman and the woman after that and the woman after that. And in some ways, I think that is true in the sense that it has to be cumulative. There's lessons now, I think, that we're learning a decade on that will help. But in the last 10 years, why has there not been another female prime minister? And why, even though Australia has a lot more women in parliament, actually on the global scale of women, we've gone down.
We have.
We're not progressing nearly as fast as we should be.
Yeah, on all scales of gender equity measurement against the World Economic Report, Australia's going backwards rapidly. We used to be in the top 20. We're now below 45. Yeah, we're going backwards. What's your sense, like when you thought about, joining us tonight, Tosca, what was it that you thought about that you wanted to share most of all?
Look, I've been working with independents here as well. It's independents who have most grabbed this film and are using it as inspiration and are really galvanised by it. And I'm really excited by that. We made this film hoping that it would do something similar to A Final Quarter, which probably a lot of you have seen, which is the story of Adam Goodes and his 3-year career. So as a template, it worked similarly for us in terms of convincing broadcasters that this could be done, that Gillard had a 3-year career. She was obviously in the media every single day. We weren't going to be short of material. So I initially thought, to be really ambitious, I want to do what that film did for sexism, as it did for racism. And what has just been so amazing for myself and the editor who worked so hard on this film is all of you guys, and to feel that it will galvanize people and it will get them talking. It will make people angry. That was always the intention. We should all be angry about what happened. And I think we need to hold on to that anger, as Janine obviously knows, and kind of grabbed a movement, a movement of anger that to insist on change. Okay. And I think if we stop doing that, we lose, we keep falling back.
Agree. And so I'm going to come to you in a sec, Janine, about movement building, but I just wanted to share with everyone, because I spent a lot of my time in Parliament and worked quite closely with Julia, and I actually happened to be in Parliament the day of that horrific rally, which was an anti-carbon tax rally, but the police presence was very strong. It was on the lawns in front of Parliament House, as all protests are. And I walked around, it was a really angry group of men predominantly. And that's just one of the stickers that I picked up. Julia Gillard is backstabbing liar, killing our country. There was about 10 other stickers like this that were so outrageously violent. Some had knives in the back of our Prime Minister. And when I approached the police and said, this is outrageous, this is inciting violence, it's also inciting violence towards our Prime Minister. How can you let this happen? Tony Abbott was on stage. He was the guy saying, ditch the witch. And I watched that all play out. Nobody thought that it was inappropriate. Nobody complained. It was quite extraordinary. So I'm very pleased to see that you captured that in the documentary, but I'm also really pleased to see that that Julia has really, taken that ground and said unacceptable from this point forward. It's a very important thing. We cannot deal with this if we're going to move into Parliament. If we're going to get more women elected, there is profound and deep transformation that needs to occur in terms of the culture and behaviours. And I think you've captured that and catalysed that beautifully. Thanks, Tosca. So Janine, can I come to you? Because Tosca's talking about catalysing anger in a way that changes people's choices when it comes to election. Well, that was amazing what you did. The March for Justice was fantastic, and you catalysed that sense of enough is enough. Do you want to talk to us a bit about that in terms of how you think that plays out for independence in the next election?
Sure. I think there's two things to talk about. Certainly with March for Justice, we were able to really harness the anger in the community. And as you said in your introduction, Jo, gender equality has declined rapidly in Australia in the last 8 years, indeed, since Julia Gillard was the Prime Minister. And of course, what we're seeing as a result of that decline in gender equality is this increase in gender violence against women. And what March for Justice effectively did was give women the voice and harness the power of individuals in a collective sense to really say, enough is enough. This is a real issue. And one of the things that March for Justice did, and one of the reasons I think it was so successful, is we were really strategic. March for Justice is not and had never intended to be a feminist collective. We sat there right at the outset with the team and identified what we needed to do. And that is what we have continued to do. So our approach from here on in, and I think this is important when we talk about independence in Parliament, is we have to change the narrative around issues such as gendered violence and, of course, equality, because gendered violence is directly related, of course, to equality. So we really need to be talking about these issues. We really need to be talking about what really are the implications to women that are occurring in society as a result of gender inequality. And the second thing that we really need to aim for is the structural and systemic reform that is going to support that. And that reform must be absolutely quotas, not only gendered quotas, but quotas in Parliament. A lot of people talk about, and a lot of organisations, they talk about, well, we've got targets. We're going to encourage women. We're going to encourage diversity, etc., etc. they don't work.
Well, no,
They
that's
don't
right.
work.
It doesn't work. I mean,
It
in
doesn't work.
fact, regardless of legislation and policy, the only thing that's ever worked to increase numbers in Parliament is quotas.
Correct.
And where the Labor Party brought in the quotas, we see equal representation.
Correct.
You know, so and that's a global story everywhere. And there's social
Absolutely.
commentary about that says, oh, it has to be on merit and all that sort of thing. But quotas is the only thing that's ever worked because it moves you to a point of normalisation, doesn't it?
Correct.
So,
and it's not only got to be in Parliament. Parliament is a great step because these are our lawmaking institutions, but it's got to be in our university sector, in our legal sector, in our, you know, on the boards. It's got to be normalised. And the thing that really kind of gets me is we know what to do. We know this. We've got the information. We know we've got to establish quotas. We know what we have to do. And so the question that I think any independents have got to be asking is, well, why isn't it being implemented?
well, that's right. But this is an open question to both of you, actually. I mean, we know why women hesitate in terms of stepping up. And a huge part of that is the misogyny of the culture in which politics exists at all levels, local, state, federal, global. I mean, Tosca and Janine, I mean, what do you think we can learn from the misogyny speech and its impact? Where do you think that's carried us in terms of courage or conviction or change?
I think I think the most important thing it did is it brought the term misogyny into our everyday lexicon, that suddenly everyone knew what misogyny actually was, and everyone knew what misogyny kind of looked like. And there were plenty of examples, particularly in the documentary, the focus on Abbott and Abbott's kind of, you know, the famous quote when he was ironing, and Abbott constantly talking about his wife and his daughter, which of course is exactly the same as what Morrison does. So we do have this understanding of what misogyny actually is. That, and narcissism seems to be the word that has come into the lexicon really with Morrison. That's positive. That's positive. I'd be curious what Tosca thinks is the impact of the speech, the misogyny speech.
Thanks, Janine.
I love what it's done for young women. So we have in the film a whole lot of TikToks, and you know, this whole movement that started of young women doing these TikToks to the misogyny speech, which they'd all memorized, I just thought was a beautiful kind of synergy of using social media and this speech, and it you know, sort of being brought to life in a new way. So I think it's still got work to do, the misogyny speech. It's and maybe it's gaining momentum. You know, I did a panel just after the documentary went to air with Chanel Contos and Yasmin Poole. So these young women who'd watched the film, and I actually just hardly said anything. I just sat back and listened to them because they had such interesting things to say about it. And I really got the sense that they just were going to approach it all quite differently. They were, you know, I mean, you hear it in the way Grace Tame speaks to Scott Morrison. If he calls her Grace, she calls him Scott. You know, it just seems to be completely logical. I think even though these seem like very small examples, I think they're actually quite significant. And we do need to, you know, we need to keep throwing it on its head, as she did in the misogyny speech, and say, can we just reverse it here and see how it looks? So yeah, I think it's still got a lot of work to do.
I think you're right, but that's really nice. I think it is a good example that in some way we made it just a little bit easier for for women in future to take those steps, because there's much more visibility now, isn't there? And there's a much stronger sense of sharing stories about our experience and how we've dealt with this and what to do. And so, you know, we've got the pioneers, if you like, we've got the pathways, and together the movement is growing. So thank you both so much. I'm looking at clocks, and it's really important that we hear some questions. So everyone, we're going to, with the chat functions working, I can see that, it's really nice, but I'd like you to send in your questions. And can you start by letting us know if it's a question for Tosca or Janine? We'll see your name and where you're from, but let us know which way the question wants to go. So right away, and there's a few of us going to be reading and capturing questions, and we'll take it from there. So I've got to take, my eyesight goes up and down and up and down. So here we go. Let's have a look. I've got the misogyny speech on a tea towel as well. That was a good thing. The Victorian Women's Trust has some really great merch on the misogyny speech, by the way. Alrighty. Let's hear your questions, everyone.
I'm just going to unmute myself and jump right in.
Okay, that's good.
Tosca, I know you made the film during COVID because you were able to do that because it was all like archival footage, so you couldn't go out and be doing things. But what actually prompted you to make it in the first place? What was the trigger?
Well, I had been wanting to make an archive film about Gillard for a while, and I was working with a fantastic editor on the series, See What You Made Me Do. And we were obviously filming that series, and suddenly when COVID hit, we got shut down. And so we raced to SBS and made the argument that we could all keep working if we did this film, because we didn't need to go and film it. We just needed to keep pulling the archive together. And so we did. We all went home, and we just pass a hard drive between us once a week, and we didn't miss a day's work. So in some ways we used the lockdown to our advantage and kept, otherwise I think it would have been a long time before I actually got the broadcaster across the line to do it.
Thank you. Anne, we can see that you want to ask Tosca something, but I can't see the question. Do you want to unmute and go for it?
Okay, so basically, I'm just thinking about the values that underpin the message of the documentary. You know, values of decency and valuing diversity and respect. And I think it struck me that that's very much what Voices have been talking about, you know, the importance of values and integrity in politicians in the political process. And I'm interested to speculate how it might be possible to get people's values, the values of candidates across as distinct from posturing, because all politicians say how wonderful they are and how they're honest and family people and all that sort of stuff. But I think the challenge is to actually have values as a really important part of making a candidate visible, and to do it, you know, so to actually present them in a way that the values speak for them.
What I would, I mean, that is such an interesting and difficult question. Mm-hmm. I know that if the media had behaved differently with Julia Gillard, then we would have seen a different kind of politician. And I think that is that, you know, the way that the Murdoch media frames people kind of takes the power out of their hands anyway. And that's the difficulty that we have in Australia as anyone going into politics. It's one thing how you frame yourself. It's another thing how the media are going to frame you.
Mm. That's right. I think that's good. That's great. Janine, we've got a question here. from, just a minute, I think it's from Sarah Russell. She's really interested to know how you think we can sustain the momentum that you created around the Women's March.
What we did after the march is that we actually have set up Women's March for Justice as a company. I've put a board in place and an advisory board in place. And that company supports, we've got about 30 groups around Australia, certainly in the capital cities, but in some of the regional towns who have continued their activism at a local level. So Women's March for Justice is really the only national body that is independent. So we've got no government funding, which actually gives us extraordinary latitude. And we national deal with equality, and we've got people on the ground. So it's become quite an extraordinary organisation. We were going to have another march in October, but it was just too difficult with both, at that time, New South Wales and Victoria in lockdown. So there'll certainly be an anniversary march, and we'll keep working from there. And that will keep the momentum going. I know on my Twitter feed, there's constantly questions about when we're going to march again. And you've got to be a little bit careful that you don't get fatigued. And of course, in Melbourne over the last, 6 weeks, we've had a lot of the freedom marches, etc., which I'm very fatigued with. So we've got to be really careful in terms of using marching as a means of communicating your message. It needs to be used in conjunction with a lot of other communication tools.
Thanks, Janine. That's absolutely right. Marching is one part of a strategy towards transformative change. There's no question. I've got a question for both of you here from Micah, I think. She says, making ourselves heard by our political representatives individually is really hard. I've given up trying to get an appointment with Greg and Chris Brain, who's our state MP. How do we get our message out that we're so unhappy with the status quo on gender equality and diversity without having to get hundreds of thousands of women and supporters on the street?
It's a really, really, it's a terrific question. And really, there is power in individuals leveraging their own personal networks and their own power, but the real power does come from collective action. That is where the real power lies, and I'm really sorry, there is no, as I see it, it is much easier if you are working collectively, but
it is, but interesting, because you showed an interesting point of strategy, those of you in Canberra, when you refused to meet with Scott Morrison inside. So that was an interesting one, wasn't it? Sometimes we can't meet them because they won't, and sometimes we can meet them, but we won't. So there's always a point in time.
It was it was really tough for me, and it was kind of. Let me tell you a funny story. The Prime Minister's office rang my mobile phone on the Sunday afternoon, and one of the PR people picked it up and said, "Oh, Janine, it's the Prime Minister's office on the phone." And I said, "Oh." So I answered the phone, and they invited me to the meeting and said, "When would you be available?" And my response was, "Well, I don't know, I'm very busy, I'll get back to you." And the PR person thought that was hilarious. I was always very conflicted about that meeting. Contrary to what the media had backgrounded me with, did not make a decision. They certainly set up the meeting, but I did not confirm it. And when I read the responses, there was something like 10,500 messages on my Twitter feed alone, personal messages. I knew it wasn't for me to speak on behalf of the women there. Yeah. That was not my job at all. But it's interesting. But what would a meeting have achieved?
It was clearly their strategy to try and do that, to divide
Correct.
and conquer, as they call it.
Divide and conquer.
It's a fairly old strategy.
It was, yeah, it was, for me, it was the right decision to decline the invitation, and I think that we retained the power. The women of Australia retained the power by doing that. Thanks,
Janine. I've got another question here from Sean. This is for both of you, but maybe Tosca, if you could start, please. Sean's saying, Julia was maybe one of the best leaders we've had. Great integrity, stood up for high values, but she couldn't beat the party system to put equal marriage before Parliament due to the old seats and the old stories. So does this mean, is this a strong indication that we need more Julia Gillards on the crossbench as independents?
Yeah.
It's a no-brainer, really, isn't it?
Yeah, I think you've kind of asked the question and answered it. I mean, you know, she's still part of the machine, obviously, and it's interesting that not one single Labor federal member has commented on this film, not one, in any way. So, you know, they're part of a machine that works as a mob. And so I guess that's why making this film to me has just so exposed the need for independence, especially now when, you know, politics is kind of based on sound bites, and our understanding of policy is so simplified if we understand it at all, and that's how we get sold down the river. You know, it just feels as though it's independents who are calling the truths.
I totally agree. So that's an interesting insight in terms of the party. I understand Julia didn't want to watch the documentary, but what feedback have you had from her about the documentary?
Yeah, I still can't believe she hasn't, but she does say that she hasn't. Look, she has such a strange relationship with this film because she so doesn't identify as a victim. And so she was really uncomfortable with the whole idea that it turned her into a victim, which I guess it does. But on the other hand, she was very supportive of us making it, and she allowed me to speak to anyone I wanted to speak to. There were no limitations, there were no caveats to anything. But she also didn't actively contribute to it. So she allowed it to be what we were going to turn it into. One thing for her, and this is an interesting thing that we've grappled with, is obviously the film potentially ends on this really sad note of her losing the job, and then Abbott making himself Minister for Women. And arguably that's where we could have finished the film and left everyone just with the horror of it. Instead, we decided to put the epilogue on that you played at the start of this conversation, which, you know, brings everything up again and looks at the positives and looks at all the women who are in leadership around the world, and that is, you know, that is gaining momentum. And for Gillard, it was absolutely vital that was there, because she wants young women to feel that there are supporters out there for them, and that there is a group that they can join. They are not alone. You know, the film makes her feel very alone, because in so many ways she was.
Thank you. It's very interesting. So, you know, I mean, we're sort of getting to the point where we need to start to wrap up, and we've got some beautiful music for you, and I'd like to hear some comments about this session. But, you know, the Voices movement is a very important one. Tonight is all about this, and so, you know, learning from you about how we catalyse change, how we generate momentum is very much about what we're going to have to do to get an independent candidate up in our electorate. So any observations about, you know, how different parts of society, you know, different identities can be the most effective advocates for positive change? Women are standing up. We've got a movement. We've got a sense of identity behind us, but we need, you know, particularly the guys out there, we need a lot more conversation there for them to say, yeah, we really need some worldly wise women in Parliament, don't we? You know, does everyone know? So Adrian's question was, what do you believe are the most effective ways for men to be advocates for positive change?
One of the things that I think we need to stress over and over again is when we talk about equality, is recognition that inequality gives huge benefit to a few, but equality benefits us all. So there's got to be more narrative around the benefits of equality. We know economically, socially, on every metric, it's going to be really positive. But it also means that men and those with the power, that hold the power now, have the most to lose. So in terms of what men can do, you've got to walk the talk. You've got to walk the talk. There's got to be this recognition of your privilege. And you've got to step back and learn to stand aside women, not in front of them, above them. I don't think it's any more complex than that. When we look at the documentary and look at Abbott's behaviour, there was no standing beside. It was incredible to watch that. But yeah, men have a really important role to play in this. And I always argue that inequality really, you know, it's something that affects women and impacts on women, but it's up to men to give over to create great change.
Thanks, Janine. Tosca, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, actually, you know, I think that's a great question. What can men do? We had a screening of the film at the Sydney Film Festival this weekend that's just gone past, and Rob Oakeshott was there in the audience. So I got him to stand up, and a part of me was resistant to doing that because I thought I don't want people to think, oh yeah, one man says one important thing and he's the one who gets all the glory. But actually, I think the point of it was that he really stood out at that time. As he said to me, thank you for putting that speech in. And I had to say, I didn't have a choice. It's not like I could choose between a whole lot of different speeches that men made at that time. You were the only one who did it. So not that other men were supporting Gillard within the Labor Party. I know that's true. But he was the one who stood up and gave that beautiful speech. And so for him to be calling it out then, he's still calling it out now. You know, just call it as you see it, and you are seeing it. I guess that's the thing for men. It's too easy to ignore.
Nicely said. Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone. So many questions, and I hope you all feel that you were heard in some way. I'm just doing a little check on my clock. We've got 8 minutes, so we've got some really beautiful music for you, which is strong in message and is linked to us asking you to give us feedback. But I'm just going to say a few quick thank yous because lots of really, really good people were behind the scenes on bringing this together. And let's hope there's lots more forums because What a nice way to spend time with good concerned people. So I'm going to thank Tosca and Janine so much. You two Wonder Women. Don't know what we'd do without you. Carry on. Can't wait to see what you do next. And to all of you that joined and signed up. It's really great to have, 60, 70 people engaged in Strong Women Lead, and of course what that means in terms of hopefully outcomes for independence in government. I want to thank the VMP organisers, all these really amazing people, so much energy and commitment. Michelle, Trish, Sean, Louise, Michael, Micah, Jan, Claire, Sarah, and lots of others. And I'm only just starting to meet you all, but thank you so much. It's been fantastic. And so we're going to finish off tonight with a short performance from two young VMP members. There you are. Hello, Monique and Francine. And they're going to be singing a couple of songs. The first is called In a Name. I hope I've said that right. And that was written by Titus, who I just love. My son's first lullaby was one of the Titus songs. Anyway, and then a song called Treat You Better, which is written by two sisters called the Mays. So while you're listening to that music, everyone, can I ask you to please send comments on the chat line, send comments about what you think about tonight's forum. So, comments, reflections, whatever it is, because evaluation is really important in terms of getting this right and making it more effective each time we do it. So have a listen to some beautiful music, send in your comments, and it's over to you, Monique and Francine, and thank you so much for sharing your music with us tonight. Meanwhile, I'll say good night and thank you to everyone, and I hope you have a lovely week, and we'll see each other soon. Bye-bye.
I don't think we can hear any sound just yet.
Sean, can you get onto the sound for us, please? Can't hear you. You're on mute.
Yeah, I'm not sure what's happening with the sound. Just hang on a tick, everyone. Apologies for that.
Thank you.
Did the first song come through at all? It was no. Okay, I'm not sure what's happening there. It worked in the test earlier.
Sean, when you play it, just make sure you're unmuted.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. All right. Here we go again.
Thanks for all these lovely comments, everyone. It's really great.
Well, let's see. I'll go back to that song.
Okay. And everyone, share some ideas if you think anything else needs to be done in future on the forums.
Is that working now?
Ooh is a song called Treat You Better by two sisters called The Mays. And we've been quite inspired by them for a while. They're two strong women, and we've been to a few of their events, and they've always been very sure of themselves and confident in their singing, but in who they are as well. And we wanted to sing this song because it's about standing up for yourself and not being afraid to do that, and treating each other and confident in their singing, but in who they are as well. And we wanted to sing this song because it's about standing up for yourself and not being afraid to do that, and treating each other, including ourselves, really well. So we wanted to sing this for you. Do you remember the wrecking ball that's burning? Fear of the fall took you half a lifetime. Pick yourself up from the broken ground. Do you remember the firelight? Sang all morning, we danced all night. Our life isn't like that. It's like they're gonna let you down. Honey, I'm gonna treat you better than that. Gonna treat you better than that. When you're in too deep, gonna pull you back. Gonna treat you better than that. I'm not much of a pioneer, never sure the ground rules here, but at the end of it all, take any kind of fall through the flood. Wasn't much of a runaround. Safest way to never come down is to stay steadfast, let it pass over the horizon. Honey, I'm gonna treat you better than that. Gonna treat you better than that. When you're in too deep, gonna pull you back. Gonna treat you better than that. Honey, I'm gonna treat you better than that. Gonna treat you better than that. When you're in too deep, gonna pull you back. Gonna treat you better than that. 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 Honey, I'm gonna treat you better than that. Gonna treat you better than that. When you're in too deep, gonna pull you back. Gonna treat you better than that. All right. That's Francine and I done for this evening, but we both really wanted to say a huge thank you for allowing us to perform tonight and be here in this space. I'm really proud of community coming together, and this is, has been an amazing evening. And here's to what can come from community and women coming together and standing up for each other and creating change. So thank you again for allowing us to perform, and hopefully you have a beautiful rest of the evening.
Thank you so much, beautiful ladies. And good night to you all. And thank you so much for joining. Bye-bye for now. Good evening.
Thank you. Good night.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Good night.
Sorry for the technical problems, Monique and Francine. And yeah,
No, good. Thank you for organising that. That worked well.
no worries. Yeah, we had a few little technical problems going backwards and forwards, but we got there. Well done, Joe.
No problem.
Loved it. Thanks, everyone.
Well done,
It's
Trish.
so white. It's really weird. Weird. We're pink. We're all sort of pink. It's weird. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Michelle. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Really nice working with you all. I appreciate all your help. Thank you.
Well done.
Well done, everyone. Great job. What a nice night.
We've learnt a lot next time, haven't we?
Yeah,
It was easy.
really good.
It was, yeah, all that technical. I mean, it was no major.
No, it was fine.
Few
Yeah.
little hitches.
Yeah, I think the major thing was because we had two the coming in and out of the signing in for the Voices of page, so the settings that were set up got dropped and then had to be redone again. So I think that's a good lesson because it was working all. So yeah, but that's all good. We got there, and yeah.
Yeah, it's
The
great.
message is loud and clear. Well done for you all.
Excellent. Good job, guys. Have a good night.
See ya.
Yeah,
Thanks for
bye,
coming.
Maya.
See everyone.
Well done. Well done, Michelle.
Thank you. See you all.
Yeah, good job, Michelle.
It was a team effort, it wasn't me. It was everyone.
No, it's good. I'm saying it to everyone. Good night, John boy. Good night.
Good night.
All right, I'm going to end the thing for all. Is that okay? Well done.
Yep.
Yeah.
See you.
See ya.
Just before you do, Sean,
Yep.
are we meeting?
Yeah, we'll come back on the normal board.
Yeah, just check.
link.
Yeah, okay.
Cool. All right, good one. See you
See
guys. Maybe a cup of tea, quick cup of tea, bring back upstairs, and then we'll start
Sure.
in 5 or so.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. All right. See ya.